Where did you get that necklace? The words sliced through the hush of the restaurant like a blade. Kate froze mid-motion, the tray trembling in her hands. The billionaire's phone lay forgotten, his eyes locked on the tiny silver hummingbird glinting at her throat. Around them, crystal glasses chimed softly, unaware that 2 decades of buried grief had just been unearthed. To him, it was proof of a ghost he'd lost. To her, it was the only memory of a mother slipping away. What neither knew yet was that this fragile chain would pull both their lives into a storm of truth and ruin. The Gilded Spoon was a universe away from Kate Sterling's reality. By day, she breathed in the fumes of turpentine and linseed oil in her cramped studio apartment, chasing the elusive dream of being a painter. By night, she donned a crisp black uniform and navigated a world of quiet wealth where the cost of a single bottle of wine could pay her rent for 3 months. Her life was a carefully balanced act of survival, a tightrope walk over a chasm of unpaid bills and her mother's escalating medical costs. The restaurant was her safety net, fraying though it was. Tonight, the net felt particularly thin. A VVIP booking had sent a ripple of anxiety through the staff. Marcus Blackwood, the name alone, was a currency. He was the CEO of Blackwood Global, a conglomerate with tentacles in tech shipping and real estate. He was known for his ruthless business acumen and his intensely private nature, a ghost who materialized only in the pages of Forbes or behind the tinted windows of a Maybach. Kate's manager, a perpetually stressed man named Robert, had assigned her the VVIP table. "Just be invisible, Sterling," he'd hissed. "Waterbread, take his order, and then melt into the wallpaper. The man eats silence for breakfast." Kate had knotted her stomach a knot of nerves. She approached the secluded booth with the practiced grace of a seasoned waitress. Marcus Blackwood was exactly as the tabloids depicted him. Sharp suit, steel gray hair at his temples, a face carved from granite and etched with a permanent scowl. He didn't look up from his phone, a dismissive gesture that screamed his importance. She moved with quiet efficiency, her worn-out black flats making no sound on the plush carpet. As she placed the heavy water glass down her body, leaned forward just enough for the necklace to escape the collar of her uniform. It was her most precious possession. The only thing of value she owned, a delicate silver chain holding a tiny, exquisitely detailed hummingbird, its wings frozen mid-flutter. Her mother had given it to her on her 8th birthday, a piece of their shared, albeit hazy past. "Your water, sir," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. That's when it happened, the sharp intake of breath, the clatter of the phone on the table. The world seemed to slow down, the ambient chatter of the restaurant fading into a dull roar in Kate's ears. She straightened up, startled to find Marcus Blackwood's eyes locked on her chest, not on her, but on the necklace. His face, once a mask of cold indifference, was now a maelstrom of raw, unguarded emotion, shock, disbelief, and a pain so profound it seemed to suck the air out of the room. His voice, when it came, was a rasp, a sound scraped from the depths of his soul. "Where did you get that?" The question was not a polite inquiry. It was an accusation, an indictment. Kate's hand flew instinctively to the hummingbird, her fingers closing around the cool metal. I'm sorry." She stammered, her professional composure disintegrating. He pushed himself forward in the booth, his 6-foot frame suddenly seeming to dominate the entire space. The patrons at nearby tables began to notice their curious glances turning into overt stares. "The necklace," he bit out, his voice shaking with a barely controlled tremor. He pointed a finger that trembled slightly. "That hummingbird? Where did you get it?" "It was a gift," Kate said, her own voice trembling now. "From my mother. I've had it my whole life." Blackwood's eyes narrowed, the raw emotion hardening into suspicion. "Your mother? Who is your mother? Did she work for me? For my family?" "No, sir. I don't think so. Her name is Elelanina Sterling. She was a nurse." Kate felt a flush of heat crawl up her neck. This was a nightmare. She was supposed to be invisible, and now she was the center of a scene created by one of the most powerful men in New York City. Robert was already gliding towards them, his face a pale mask of horror. A nurse. Blackwood repeated the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. He shook his head, a gesture of violent denial. That's impossible. He looked at her again, his gaze forensic, searching her face for something. For a hint of a lie, a flicker of deceit. "Sir, is there a problem?" Robert asked, arriving at the table, his voice oozing anxious deference. Marcus Blackwood ignored him completely. His eyes, burning with an intensity that terrified Kate, remained fixed on her. He spoke, and his words, though low, carried the weight of an earthquake, shaking the very foundations of Kate Sterling's small, fragile world. "That necklace," he said, his voice cracking with the strain of 2 decades of grief. "It belonged to my daughter who died 20 years ago." The silence that followed was absolute. The clinking of cutlery stopped. The low hum of conversation vanished. In that moment, Kate was no longer a waitress. She was a thief, an imposter, a ghost from a past that wasn't hers, standing accused in the court of a billionaire's sorrow. The delicate silver hummingbird suddenly felt as heavy as an anchor threatening to pull her under. The manager's office at the Gilded Spoon was a cramped, windowless box that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. It felt like an interrogation room, a feeling amplified by the 2 men seated opposite Kate. Marcus Blackwood had dismissed Robert with a curt wave of his hand, his authority so absolute that the manager had practically skewered from his own office. The second man, who had appeared as if from thin air, introduced himself as Frank Miller, head of Mr. Blackwood's personal security. He was a broad-shouldered man with a quiet, watchful demeanor that was far more intimidating than any overt threat. Kate sat on a flimsy chair, her hands clenched in her lap. The hummingbird necklace, now tucked safely back beneath her collar, its familiar weight against her skin, offered no comfort, only a cold, alien dread. "Let's start again, Miss Sterling." Marcus began, his voice devoid of the raw emotion from the dining room. It was now clipped precise and infinitely colder. "You claim your mother, Elelena Sterling, gave you this necklace." "She did." Kate insisted, her voice steadier than she felt. "For my fifth birthday, she said it was special to always keep it safe." "And where is your mother now?" Frank Miller asked, his tone neutral, his eyes missing nothing. Kate swallowed hard. "She's in a long-term care facility, St. Jude's residence upstate. She has early-onset Alzheimer's." The admission felt like a betrayal, a weakness she was exposing to these powerful men. Marcus Blackwood's expression didn't soften. How convenient, he murmured the words, dripping with cynicism. He leaned forward, his hands steepled on the desk. "I will be blunt, Miss Sterling. The piece you are wearing is not a replica. It is a one-of-a-kind design by the Florentine jeweler Lorenzo Bellini. I commissioned it for my daughter Lily for her first birthday. There is a microscopic inscription on the clasp, 'My Little Bird,' and her birth date. I would be willing to wager a significant sum that your necklace bears those exact markings." Kate's blood ran cold. She had never looked at the clasp that closely. It was just a part of her, an extension of her own history. "My daughter," Marcus continued, his voice dropping the ice in his tone, cracking to reveal the raw wound beneath, was lost in a boating accident off the coast of Montauk 20 years ago. She was with her mother, my late wife Hannah. There was a sudden squall. The boat capsized. We found my wife's body. We never found Lily's or the necklace she was wearing." He paused, letting the weight of his tragedy fill the small room. "So you will understand my curiosity when a waitress in a restaurant shows up 2 decades later wearing my dead child's necklace, claiming it was a gift from her mother, a nurse who now conveniently cannot remember anything." The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Thief, liar, grave robber. He didn't say the words, but he didn't have to. "I am not a liar," Kate said, a spark of anger cutting through her fear. "And my mother is not a thief. There has to be an explanation. I agree, Marcus said smoothly. And I will find it. Frank will be running a full background check on you and your mother. Every school you attended, every job you've held, every dollar you've ever earned. We will investigate this Elena Sterling's employment history specifically 20 years ago. We will find the connection. This is insane, Kate breathed, shaking her head. You can't just invade my life like this. Watch me. Marcus's voice was like chipping ice. Alternatively, you can give me the necklace right now. Tell me the truth about how you acquired it, and I will be generous. I will provide a sum that will solve all your immediate financial problems. Your mother's care, your student loans, your little art hobby, all of it taken care of. You walk away, and we never see each other again. The offer was a lifeline and an insult all at once. For a dizzying moment, Kate considered it a life without the constant, grinding weight of debt. A life where she could afford the best care for her mother, where she could paint without the specter of eviction looming over her. It was everything she had ever wanted, but it would mean admitting she was a fraud. It would mean spitting on the only precious memory she had of her mother from a time before the disease stole her away. It would mean betraying the woman who had raised her, hoved her, and sacrificed everything for her. She looked Marcus Blackwood dead in the eye. The necklace is not for sale, and I am not a liar. You can investigate all you want. You won't find anything because there's nothing to find. A flicker of something surprised respect crossed Marcus's face before it was shuttered away. He stared at her for a long moment, a predator assessing its prey. Very well, he said, finally standing up. The interview was over. You will find yourself on administrative leave from this establishment effective immediately. With pay, he added a gesture that was less about kindness and more about control. You are not to leave the city. Frank will be in touch. He will require access to your mother's personal effects, any old photographs, letters, documents you may have. You will cooperate fully. If you do not, I will bring the full force of my legal team down upon you. I will dismantle your life piece by piece until you have nothing left. Am I understood? Kate stood on shaky legs, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was no longer in a manager's office. She was in a gilded cage, and Marcus Blackwood held the key. Understood, she whispered. As she walked out of the restaurant and into the cool night air, the city lights of New York seemed to mock her. Just hours ago, she was an anonymous face in the crowd. Now she was the focus of a billionaire's obsessive grief, her entire existence thrown into question by a tiny silver hummingbird. St. Jude's residence was a place where memories went to die. The air hung heavy with the scent of antiseptic and overcooked vegetables, a sterile perfume that failed to mask the underlying odor of decay and resignation. Kate hated it here. She hated the placid, smiling faces of the staff, the relentlessly cheerful pastels on the walls, and most of all, she hated what this place represented. The slow, inexorable fading of her mother, Elena. Elena Sterling was sitting by the window in the communal sunroom, staring out at a manicured lawn she didn't see. The fog of Alzheimer's had rolled in thick and fast over the past few years. Some days it was a light mist, and Kate could catch glimpses of the sharp, witty woman who had raised her. On other days, like today, it was an impenetrable wall. "Mom," Kate said softly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Elena turned her pale blue eyes, once so vibrant, now cloudy and unfocused. A flicker of recognition, a brief sunny spell in the fog. Katie Bird. You came. She called her Katie Bird. She always had. Kate's heart ached. Of course I came, Mom. Kate pulled up a chair, forcing a smile. How are you feeling today? The tide is out, Elena said, her gaze drifting back to the window. He'll be back soon. We have to be quiet. It was one of her loops, a scrambled memory replaying endlessly. Kate had long since learned not to argue with them. Instead, she gently took her mother's hand, her skin thin and papery. Mom, I need to ask you about something important. It's about my necklace, the hummingbird. Kate pulled it from under her shirt, letting it rest in her palm. You gave this to me, remember, for my 5th birthday. Elena's eyes fixed on the silver bird. For a moment, the fog seemed to recede. Her brow furrowed a genuine spark of cognition in her eyes. Pretty bird, she murmured, her thumb stroking its delicate wing. My little bird. Kate's breath caught in her throat. My little bird. The exact words Marcus Blackwood had said were inscribed on the clasp. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. Yes, Mom. My little bird. Where did you get it? It's so beautiful. Was it a gift from Dad? Kate's father was a ghost, a man who had left before she was old enough to form a single memory of him. Elena's face clouded over again. The moment of clarity was gone. The storm. She whispered, her hand tightening on Kate's. So much water. The baby was crying so loud. A promise is a promise, Katie Bird. You have to keep the promise. What promise, Mom? What baby? Kate pressed, her heart starting to pound. This was new. She had never mentioned a baby before, but the connection was lost. Elena pulled her hand away and began agitatedly smoothing the wrinkles on her dress. The linens need changing. Dr. Roberts will be cross, must be clean. Everything must be clean. The conversation was over. Kate stayed for another hour talking about her art, about the weather, about anything and everything, hoping for another lucid moment that never came. She left St. Jude's with a deeper sense of dread than when she had arrived. A storm, a crying baby, a promise. These weren't memories. They were fragments of a nightmare. Back in her cramped apartment, the smell of turpentine, a welcome, familiar comfort. Kate was a woman possessed. Marcus Blackwood's threat had lit a fire under her. She couldn't wait for his investigator to dismantle her past. She had to excavate it herself. Beneath her bed was a large, battered trunk filled with the detritus of her mother's life before the illness. It was a time capsule. She rarely opened a painful reminder of everything they had lost. Now she pulled it out. Dust motes dancing in the single beam of afternoon light slanting through her window. She spent hours sifting through yellowed photographs of a younger, happier Elena report cards from Kate's childhood stacks of paperback nursing textbooks. There was nothing, no clue, no hint of a connection to the Blackwoods, no mention of Montauk or a man named Lorenzo Bellini. Her mother's life had been painfully ordinary. A dedicated nurse who worked long hours at a series of city hospitals, a single mother devoted to her only child. Just as she was about to give up, her fingers brushed against a false bottom in the trunk. Her heart leapt. Prying it open, she found a small tin box, the kind used for biscuits. Inside, nestled amongst some dried flowers and a few baby teeth, was a small, tattered bundle of papers, held together by a brittle rubber band. Most were just old nursing schedules and pay-ubs, but at the very bottom was a single yellowed newspaper clipping. It was dated 20 years ago. The headline was "Stark Tragedy at C. Blackwood Heiress Lost Wife of CEO Dead." Kate's hands shook as she read the article. It detailed the boating accident, the freak squall, the death of Hannah Blackwood. It mentioned their 1-year-old daughter Lillian, known as Lily, who was presumed drowned. Her body swept away by the current. There was a photo of Marcus and Hannah in happier times, and a small, grainy picture of a smiling baby. A baby wearing a delicate silver chain around her neck. Kate felt the floor drop out from under her. It was the hummingbird necklace. Beneath the clipping was a single photograph she had never seen before. It was of her mother, Elena, looking exhausted but resolute, holding a swaddled infant. The baby in the photo was Kate, and behind them, faintly visible through the window of what looked like a hospital room, was a wind-swept coastline and a stormy sea. The date stamp on the back of the photograph was the day after the Blackwood boating accident. Kate sank to the floor. The photo and the clipping clutched in her hand. Her entire life, her identity was built on the foundation of her mother's love. But the ground beneath her was crumbling, revealing a dark, terrifying chasm. The fragments her mother had uttered, the storm, the water, the crying baby, were not the ramblings of a diseased mind. They were echoes of a 20-year-old secret that was about to drown her. Marcus Blackwood's office was a monument to power, occupying the entire top floor of the Blackwood Tower. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, but Marcus saw none of it. For days he had been staring at the same image on his oversized monitor, a high-resolution photograph of Kate Sterling taken by Frank's surveillance team, her head tilted just so the silver hummingbird stark against her black waitress uniform. Hope was a poison, and he had spent 2 decades building up an immunity to it. After Lily's disappearance, he had poured billions into a private investigation that had lasted for 7 years. He had chased down every crackpot psychic, every false lead, every cruel hoaxer who tried to capitalize on his grief. He had followed dead-end trails to South America and Eastern Europe. In the end, all he had was a gaping hole in his life and a fortified wall around his heart. And now this waitress, this girl with honest eyes and a story that was just plausible enough to be a sophisticated lie and just outlandish enough to be the impossible truth. Anything he asked without turning as Frank Miller entered the office. "We're building a picture," Frank said, his voice the calm, steady anchor in Marcus's turbulent world. He placed a slim file on the expansive desk. Catherine Sterling, 21 years old art student at Cooper Union on a partial scholarship top of her class, works 30 hours a week at the Gilded Spoon to cover the rest of her tuition and living expenses. No boyfriend, 1 close friend, a Jessica Davis, another waitress, no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. By all accounts, she's quiet, hard-working, and keeps to herself. She pays a portion of her salary every month to St. Jude's residence for her mother's care. The mother Marcus prompted his eyes still on Kate's photo. Elena Sterling. That's where it gets interesting. Frank said she was a registered nurse. Excellent record. For 15 years she worked at New York General. Then 20 years ago she quit abruptly. No notice. Marcus finally turned his full attention on Frank. When exactly? The week of the accident. A cold stillness settled over Marcus. Go on. There are no official employment records for her for the next 2 years. It's a blank. Then she reappears working at a small community clinic in Queens. Her personnel file from that clinic notes that she was a single mother to a 3-year-old daughter, Catherine. We pulled Catherine's birth certificate. It's from a small town in Pennsylvania filed 2 years after the accident. The father is listed as unknown. A fake Marcus stated it wasn't a question. Almost certainly Frank confirmed. Creating a false identity, especially back then, wasn't as difficult as it is today. What's more telling is Elena's financial history. For those 2 years, she was off the grid. She made a series of small, regular cash deposits into a new bank account. Not enough to raise red flags, but enough for a single woman with a baby to live on frugally. "Where did the money come from?" Marcus demanded, a vein throbbing in his temple. "We are still tracing the source. It's old data buried deep. But there's more. I went back to the original police report on the accident. I spoke with the retired Coast Guard commander who led the search. He always found it strange. The squall came up fast. Yes, but the boat was a top-of-the-line vessel. It had multiple distress signals, none of which were activated. And the wreckage. Some of it suggested a fire, a small one near the engine. This was new information. In the fog of his grief, 20 years ago, Marcus had accepted the official narrative. A tragic accident, an act of God. And what about my wife's family? Marcus asked, a dark thought beginning to coalesce. What about Victoria Hannah's sister, Victoria Davenport, had always been a thorn in his side. She was cut from a different cloth than his gentle, unassuming wife. Victoria was sharp, ambitious, and consumed by a jealousy she barely bothered to conceal. She had resented Hannah for marrying into the Blackwood fortune, a life Victoria felt she, as the smarter, more worldly sister, deserved. After Hannah's death, she had made a great show of supporting Marcus, all while subtly trying to position herself within his company and his life. Victoria Davenport Frank said, pulling up another file on his tablet. She was at the family's Monk Beach house that weekend. According to her statement at the time, she was supposed to join Hannah and Lily on the boat, but begged off at the last minute with a migraine. Convenient. Marcus muttered the same word he had used to describe Ella Lenana Sterling's memory loss. We're pulling her financial records from that period. It's a painstaking process, layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts, but my forensic accountants are the best. Frank paused. There's one more thing. Ella Lenana Sterling, before she quit her job at New York General, she took a temporary assignment, a 3-month contract as a private nurse for a wealthy family. Marcus felt a jolt, as if the floor had dropped an inch. Don't tell me. The client was Hannah Blackwood Frank said quietly. She had hired Eleanor to help with the baby Lily for the summer at the Montauk estate. The air in the room became thick, heavy, and hard to breathe. The waitress's mother wasn't some random stranger, some opportunistic thief who had stumbled upon the necklace. She was there. She was in their house holding his child in the days and hours leading up to the accident. Marcus Blackwood stared out at the city below, but all he could see was a storm-tossed ocean and 20 years of lies. Kate Sterling wasn't a ghost from a stranger's past. She was a ghost from his own. And Ella Lenana Sterling, the woman with the fragmented memory, wasn't a suspect. She was a witness, the only witness. And she had placed herself and the baby Marcus believed was his daughter at the very center of the tragedy. The question was no longer if she was involved. It was how, and more terrifyingly, why. Kate felt like an archaeologist of her own life, carefully brushing away layers of dust and time to reveal a truth she wasn't sure she wanted to find. The photograph and the newspaper clipping were burned into her mind. She had spent a sleepless night staring at them, trying to reconcile the image of her loving, gentle mother with the terrifying possibility that she was a kidnapper. There had to be more. Armed with a desperate, frantic energy, she tore the lining out of the old trunk. Tucked deep into the corner taped to the wood was a slim, water-damaged journal. It was her mother's. The ink was faded and bled in many places, the pages warped and stiff. Many entries were illegible, but Kate could make out fragments, disjointed thoughts from a mind under extreme duress. So good with the baby. Little Lily. She smiles at me. V is always watching. Her eyes like chips of ice, says hateful things about H when she thinks no one can hear. Says the baby is just a porn. The handwriting grew more frantic, the entries closer together. H is scared. She told me today, scared of the boat, scared of V. She said has been talking to the captain. Money changing hands. H thinks she's trying to sabotage the engine, make it look like an accident. Kate's blood ran cold. V had to be Victoria Davenport, the sister mentioned in the news article. The last legible entry was a frantic, terrifying scroll. Storm is coming. H begged her not to go. V insisted. She took the baby. H is crying. She made me promise. Protect my little bird, she said. Whatever happens, protect her. Oh God, the engine just sputtered. We're so far from shore. Smoke. I can smell smoke. She made me promise. The rest of the page was a blur of water-smeared ink. Kate dropped the journal as if it were on fire. This wasn't a confession of a kidnapping. It was a testament to a rescue. Her mother hadn't stolen a child. She had saved one. Hannah Blackwood, fearing for her daughter's life, had made a desperate plea to the one person she trusted, the quiet, unassuming nurse who loved her baby. Ella Lenana had made a promise, and she had kept it even if it meant sacrificing her own life to disappear and raise the child as her own. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The fake birth certificate, the 2 years off the grid, the fear in Ella Lenana's fragmented memories. It wasn't guilt that haunted her. It was trauma. Just as this earth-shattering realization settled over her, her phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. Miss Sterling. The voice was Frank Miller's. It was flat, but held an undercurrent of urgency. "Mr. Blackwood wants to see you now. I'm sending a car." The ride to Blackwood Tower was a blur. Kate clutched the old journal to her chest, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She was no longer a frightened waitress. She was a woman armed with the truth, her mother's truth. She was escorted directly to Marcus Blackwood's penthouse office. He was standing by the window, a formidable silhouette against the cityscape. He turned as she entered, and his face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes held something else, a sliver of desperate hope. "My investigator just sent me his report." Marcus said, his voice tight. "He told me that your mother, Eleanor Sterling, was employed by my wife during the summer of the accident." "Yes," Kate said, her voice clear and strong. "And she didn't kidnap your daughter. She saved her." She walked forward and placed the journal on the vast mahogany desk between them. "This is my mother's journal from that time. It's damaged, but it's enough. Your wife was afraid of her sister Victoria. She thought Victoria was planning to harm them to make it look like an accident. Your wife made my mother promise to protect Lily, and that's what she did." Marcus stared at the journal, his hand hovering over it as if he were afraid to touch it. He looked at Kate, his gaze sweeping over her face, her eyes, the set of her jaw. He was searching for a resemblance, a ghost of his wife, a shadow of himself. As he reached for the journal, Frank Miller's phone buzzed. He answered, listened for a moment, and his professional composure cracked. A look of grim satisfaction settled on his face. He ended the call and looked at his boss. Sir Frank said, "My accountants found it. A hidden transfer. 20 years ago, the week before the accident, $50,000 moved from an offshore account owned by Victoria Davenport to the personal account of one Samuel Jones." Marcus looked up, his face pale. Samuel Jones. He was the boat captain, Frank confirmed. He quit his job 2 days after the incident and was never heard from again. It seems Ms. Davenport didn't just pay him for his expert sizes with engines. She paid him for his silence. The room fell silent. The journal on the desk, the story of a mother's desperate promise, the digital trail of a sister's murderous betrayal. Two different paths, one from a place of love and sacrifice, the other from a place of jealousy and greed, had converged in this room 20 years later to tell the same horrifying story. Marcus Blackwood finally picked up the journal. His hands, which controlled a global empire, trembled as he opened the tattered cover. He looked from the faded ink to the face of the young woman standing before him, and the wall he had built around his heart for 2 decades didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces. The Blackwood Family Foundation's annual charity gala was the crown jewel of New York's philanthropic calendar. It was a night of performative generosity where the city's elite gathered to write checks with multiple zeros and congratulate themselves on their magnanimity. This year it was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the grand hall filled with 1,000 gowns, hushed gossip, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Victoria Davenport was in her element. Dressed in a shimmering emerald gown, she moved through the crowd like a queen, holding court, accepting compliments on the event's flawless execution. As the chairperson of the foundation, this was her night to shine, to step out from the long shadow of her deceased sister and the towering one of her brother-in-law. She spotted Marcus near the grand staircase, looking more brooding and remote than usual. He had been even more distant these past few days, locked away with his security chief. She glided towards him, a perfectly rehearsed look of concern on her face. "Marcus, darling," she cooed, placing a manicured hand on his arm. "You came. I was so worried you were going to lock yourself away again. It does my heart good to see you, Victoria." He said, his voice flat, his eyes cold as steel. "We need to talk." "Of course, but can it wait? I have the press from the Times waiting for a quote." "It can't wait." He turned his gaze, sweeping over the opulent hall. "In fact, let's talk here in front of everyone." A flicker of unease crossed Victoria's face. This was not part of her script. Before she could protest, Marcus gestured towards the entrance. Frank Miller walked in, and beside him, looking both terrified and resolute in a simple black dress that Marcus had sent for her, was Kate Sterling. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby guests. The sight of the stoic billionaire with his security head and an unknown young woman was unusual enough to halt conversations mid-sentence. Marcus. "Who is this?" Victoria demanded, her voice losing its silky charm and gaining a sharp, brittle edge. "This," Marcus said, his voice ringing out with newfound power and clarity, drawing more and more attention. "Is the young woman you tried to have murdered 20 years ago?" The silence was now deafening. Every eye in the hall was on them. Victoria laughed, a high, nervous sound. "Marcus, what on earth are you talking about? Have you been drinking? Grief does terrible things. We all know that. But this is a public spectacle. Let's talk about public spectacles, Victoria." Marcus continued, his voice rising. "Let's talk about a boating trip in Montauk. Let's talk about a sudden squall and a faulty engine. Or was it faulty? Perhaps it was tampered with." Victoria's face paled beneath her expensive makeup. "These are insane accusations." "You have no proof, don't I?" Marcus retorted. "I have the sworn testimony of a nurse, Nina Sterling, who my wife hired that summer. A nurse who my wife confided in, telling her that you, her own sister, were acting strangely, that you were jealous, that you were meeting with the boat's captain in secret." He took a step closer, his presence utterly dominating. "And then I have financial records. Funny things, financial records. They tell stories. This one tells the story of $50,000 moving from your secret offshore account into that same captain's bank account just days before he conveniently disappeared forever." Victoria began to tremble, her eyes darting around at the sea of shocked, staring faces. Her allies, her friends, the people she had smoothed and flattered, were all looking at her as if she were a monster. It was alone. She shrieked, her carefully constructed facade cracking. He was an old friend. He was in trouble. This is a misunderstanding. Was it a misunderstanding when you insisted on taking the trip? Even though Hannah was afraid of the weather, Marcus's voice was relentless, each word a hammer blow. Was it a misunderstanding when you grabbed the baby, my Lily, and got on that boat, practically forcing my wife to follow? Kate stepped forward, then her voice shaking but clear. "My mother saved me," she said, looking directly at Victoria. "She was on that boat. She saw the smoke. She heard Hannah screaming. And she fulfilled a promise. She got me off that boat before it went down. She saved me from you." The final damning piece, a living witness. Victoria stared at Kate, at the face that was a youthful echo of the sister she despised and the man she coveted. She saw the hummingbird necklace which Kate wore openly, now a silver testament to a truth that would not stay buried. And then she broke. She had everything. Victoria screamed, the sound roar and ugly echoing off the marble floors. She was the pretty one, the loved one. She got the perfect life, the handsome billionaire, while I was left with nothing. It should have been me. I deserved that life. I deserved his fortune. That baby was just another thing she had that I didn't. It was supposed to be a simple accident. No one was supposed to survive. Her confession, raw and venomous, hung in the air, a poison that contaminated the entire glittering affair. Security guards began to move in. The flashing cameras of the press, no longer held at bay, erupted like a volley of gunfire. Victoria Davenport's public execution was complete. As she was led away, sobbing and spitting curses, Marcus Blackwood turned to Kate. He looked at her. Truly looked at her for the first time, not as a suspect or a curiosity, but as his daughter, his Lily. And in the middle of the chaos, he reached out and gently took her hand. The ghost he had been tar-chasing for 20 years was finally home. The weeks that followed the gala were a surreal tempest, A whirlwind of flashing cameras, breathless headlines, and the grinding gears of the legal system. The media exploded with the story of the lost Blackwood AIs, a modern-day fairy tale with a dark, twisted heart. Kate Sterling, the anonymous waitress, was dead. In her place was Lillian Lily Blackwood, a ghost made flesh, the subject of relentless, insatiable public curiosity. The DNA test was a formality conducted in the sterile silence of a private clinic. Marcus didn't need a lab report to tell him what his soul already knew, but the world demanded proof. He was in his office when Frank delivered the sealed envelope. He didn't open it for a full 10 minutes, simply staring at the clinical font, the final objective confirmation of a miracle. When he finally read the words, "Probability of paternity, 99 to 999%. He didn't feel the elation he expected. Instead, a profound, bone-deep weariness settled over him, the exhaustion of a 20-year marathon finally reaching its finish line. He had won, but the cost was immeasurable. He showed the report to Lily in the sterile quiet of his penthouse library. She glanced at it, her expression unreadable, and handed it back. "Okay," was all she said. The piece of paper couldn't compete with the fragmented journal entries and the look of recognition in her mother's eyes. She had known the truth before science confirmed it. Now the real impossible work began, building a bridge across a 20-year chasm. They were strangers, a father and a daughter bound by blood but separated by a universe of different experiences. Marcus, in his grief-stricken, clumsy way, tried to pave that bridge with gold. Their first family dinner was at a 3-Michelin-star restaurant, where the plates were works of art, and the silence between them was deafening. He talked about quarterly earnings and market fluctuations. She stared at a quail egg nestled in a bed of foam and thought about the lukewarm macaroni she used to eat for dinner. He asked her about her life, but his questions felt like a deposition, a data-gathering exercise to fill the vast emptiness of his knowledge. He bought her things, a wardrobe of designer clothes that felt like costumes from a play she hadn't auditioned for, a luxury apartment in his building, with panoramic views of a city she had only ever seen from street level. The breaking point came when he led her to his subterranean garage, a gleaming showroom of exotic cars. He gestured to a silver Aston Martin, a bow tied clumsily around the steering wheel. "It's yours," he said with the air of a man bestowing a great and wonderful gift. Lily looked at the car, a machine worth more than everything she and her mother had ever owned combined, and felt a wave of nausea. "I don't know how to drive," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And even if I did, where would I go?" The chasm between them seemed to widen with every expensive gesture. He was trying to give her the life Victoria had stolen, but that life wasn't hers. Her life was the smell of turpentine, the comforting weight of a paintbrush, the quiet loyalty of her friend Jess, and the heartbreaking unconditional love of a woman who was slowly forgetting her own name. The real breakthrough came not in a penthouse or a sports car, but on the quiet 2-hour drive upstate to St. Jude's residence. The silence in the Maybach was different this time. It wasn't empty, but heavy, with unspoken anxiety. Lily twisted a loose thread on her simple cotton sweater, her mind rehearsing how she would explain the impossible. Marcus stared out the window, the rolling hills, a green blur, wondering how he could possibly face the woman who had raised his daughter, a woman he owed an unpayable debt. They found Elena in the sunroom, humming a tune Lily didn't recognize. Lily knelt beside her wheelchair and took her hand. "Mom," she said softly, "I brought someone to meet you." Elena looked up, her gaze drifting past her daughter to the tall, imposing man standing awkwardly by the door. A long, silent moment passed. The fog in Elena's mind seemed to thin, her pale blue eyes focusing with an intensity that startled them both. She looked at Marcus, truly looked at him, tracing the lines of his face, the set of his jaw, the color of his eyes. "You," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "You have her eyes. Hannah's eyes." The mention of his late wife's name was a physical blow. Marcus took an involuntary step forward, his own eyes suddenly blurred with tears. He had prepared a speech, words of gratitude and apology, but they all dissolved in the face of this simple, profound observation. "Yes, Eleanor." He managed his voice thick with emotion. "I'm Marcus Lily's father." A slow, peaceful smile spread across Elena's face, a look of serene completion. "My little bird," she murmured, her gaze shifting to Lily. "I kept my promise to her mother. I kept you safe." She reached out a trembling hand and touched Lily's cheek. "The promise is kept." It was as if a great burden, a weight she had carried in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of her memory, had finally been set down. She gave Marcus one last long look. "She was a good woman, your Hannah. She loved you both so much." Then, as quickly as it came, the moment of clarity passed. The fog rolled back in, and she began to fidget with a button on her cardigan, lost once more in her own gentle world. The drive back was silent for the first hour. Lily watched the scenery pass, her heart aching with a complex mix of sorrow for her mother and a strange net warmth for the man beside her. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice raw. "I spent 20 years building an empire, surrounding myself with walls of steel and glass. I thought it was strength. I hated the world for what I'd lost. And I never once let myself imagine that someone was spending those same years simply loving her, protecting her. She gave up her name, her career, her entire life for a promise she made to my wife." He turned to her, his face a mask of grief and awe. "What she did was the bravest thing I've ever known. She's my mom." Lily replied, her voice firm with a lifetime of certainty. "She did what mothers do. She loved me. That's all I ever needed." That day, something fundamental shifted. Marcus stopped trying to buy back the past. He began tentatively to learn about the present. A few days later, he showed up unannounced at her old studio apartment, which she hadn't yet been able to part with. He stood in his thousand suit, amidst the clutter of canvases and paint-splattered rags, looking utterly out of place. But he didn't criticize the mess or the cramped space. He walked slowly around the room, looking at her paintings. He stopped in front of a dark, turbulent landscape, a canvas dominated by stormy grays and a single defiant slash of yellow. "This one," he said, his voice quiet. "What were you feeling when you painted this?" "Overwhelmed," Lily admitted. "It was right after my mom's diagnosis got worse. I felt like I was drowning." He nodded, seeing it now. He wasn't just looking at paint on a canvas. He was looking at her soul. He saw the struggle, the fear, the resilience, the spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. He saw her, the real her, the artist Elena had nurtured, not just the ghost of the baby he had lost. "You have a gift, Lily," he said. "A real gift." The next day, he didn't offer her a car or a diamond bracelet. He presented her with the blueprints for a world-class art studio to be built on the 2 floors above her old apartment, complete with northern light windows and a gallery space. It wasn't a gift for his A's. It was a commission for the artist. It was a gesture that honored the woman. She was not the child he had lost. One crisp autumn afternoon, he found her sketching by the lake in Central Park. He sat beside her on the bench, carrying 2 cups of coffee from a street vendor. For a while, they just sat watching the city go by. "I was never really Kate Sterling," she said softly, not looking up from her pad. "That was a name to keep me safe, and I don't know if I'll ever feel completely like Lily Blackwood. That name belongs to a baby in a photograph." She paused, then looked at him, her eyes clear. "I think I'm just me." Somewhere in between, Marcus looked at her, at the determined line of her jaw, so like her mother Hannah's, and the fierce intelligence in her eyes, which was all his own. He saw the kindness and resilience forged in Elena's care, and the artistic soul that was uniquely hers. She wasn't a replacement for the daughter he'd lost. She was the woman the daughter had grown up to be, shaped by a different, harder, but no less loving life. Their story wasn't a perfect circle ending where it began. It was a broken line, jagged and painful, that they were only now learning how to draw together into a new, more beautiful shape. "Me is perfect," he said, a genuine smile reaching his eyes for the first time in 20 years. "It's a wonderful place to start." Lily smiled back, a true, unguarded smile. She turned to a fresh page in her sketchbook. The past was a story written in pain and betrayal, a finished chapter they could not change. But sitting there on the park bench in the autumn sun, a father and daughter once lost to each other, finally began to write the future. Her pencil moved across the paper, not sketching one lone hummingbird, but two, their wings overlapping as they soared together into an open sky. What a journey! A story that starts with a simple glass of water and unravels a 2-decade-long mystery of betrayal, sacrifice, and a father's undying hope. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, into whole about the secrets people carry and the invisible threads that connect us all. Kate or Lily's life was completely upended by a simple piece of jewelry proving that our past never truly leaves us. Do you believe in fate, or do you think this was all a tragic coincidence finally brought to light? What would you have done in Kate's shoes when Marcus Blackwood first made his offer? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and the incredible bond between a parent and child touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. Every like helps us bring more stories like this to you. Share it with someone who loves a story of mystery and emotional reunion. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter from our channel. Thank you for listening.